Have you ever found yourself standing in front of a completely new person? Like maybe it's a new neighbor who just moved in next door or a coworker you bumped into in the break room.
Oh, and suddenly your heart is just like beating insanely fast.
Yes, exactly. Your hands get clammy and you try to open your mouth to say something casual and your mind just goes totally, terrifyingly blank.
It's just the worst feeling, and it's a profoundly universal experience, you know? That sudden spike in heart rate, the sudden inability to form a coherent thought.
It's wild because we communicate effortlessly all day long. I mean, we fire off emails, we text, we joke with our friends.
Right, but the second we face a stranger, a completely blank slate right in our physical space, the machinery just breaks down.
It really does. You're just left staring at them, hoping the ground might, like, miraculously open up and swallow you whole. So today, we were doing a deep dive into exactly this kind of scenario.
Yeah, we have a really fascinating source today that dissects a deceptively simple, everyday interaction between two strangers.
Right. It's a breakdown of a chat between two new neighbors, Sarah and Tom, meeting for the first time in their hallway.
Yeah.
And the source gives us their exact dialogue, along with some really granular commentary on the flow and structure of their chat.
What makes this analysis so compelling is that it doesn't treat this interaction as just a casual hello. It treats it as a micro case study in human psychology.
I love that.
Yeah, it looks closely at the architecture of the conversation to understand how we navigate that initial friction of, meeting someone new.
So our mission today is to deconstruct that architecture. We want to extract the underlying mechanics of how Sarah and Tom keep this interaction from flatlining.
And we're going to focus heavily on a really brilliant, highly practical strategy they use, the tactic of asking a stranger for a recommendation.
Yes, we'll explore the psychological gears turning beneath that specific tactic.
Mm.
Like, why is it so effective at neutralizing awkwardness and shifting the power dynamic?
Because it really does build immediate rapport.
Okay, let's unpack this, because I have to admit, I am deeply curious about the mechanics of this. If we can map out a reliable structure for bypassing that initial social panic, I mean, that has immense practical value for you, the listener.
Absolutely. But before we get to the conversation itself, let's talk about the physical reaction.
The panic.
Right, the panic. The commentators in our source highlight the physical symptoms, the racing heart, the sweaty palms that people frequently report when trying to talk to someone brand new.
There's a very specific biological reality to that panic, right? The source leans into normalizing it, which I think is so important.
It is crucial. It's so important for you to understand that when your mind goes blank in front of a new neighbor, it isn't like a personal failing.
There's not a lack of social grace.
No, not at all. It is a deeply ingrained physiological response. When you encounter a stranger, especially in a confined space like an apartment hallway, your brain's threat detection system lights up.
The amygdala, right?
Exactly, the amygdala. Because for the vast majority of human history, an unrecognized human in your immediate territory was a genuine survival threat.
We evolved in these small, tight-knit groups. So a stranger wasn't just an awkward encounter, it was potential danger.
Precisely. So your autonomic nervous system kicks in. Cortisol and adrenaline flood your system,
Your heart rate increases to pump blood to your muscles in case you need to fight or flee.
which perfectly explains the sweaty palms and the racing heart.
Okay, but why the blank mind? Why do I forget how to speak English when I meet the guy moving into apartment 4B?
Well, because when your brain is preparing for a physical threat, it diverts resources away from the prefrontal cortex.
And that's the area responsible for, like, complex thought and nuance.
Yes, and forming clever sentences. Your brain is essentially saying, we don't need witty banter right now. We need to assess if this person is going to attack us.
Wow. Forget the small talk. Survive.
Exactly. The cognitive load of trying to overcome millions of years of evolutionary programming while simultaneously trying to seem casual and friendly is immense.
That puts this entire interaction in such a stark perspective. It's not just a chat in a hallway.
No, it's two people actively trying to manually override their own survival instincts. They have to signal to each other's nervous systems that the environment is safe.
And that brings us to the very first move in this interaction. Tom is hauling moving boxes in the hallway.
Right, and Sarah, the established neighbor, sees him. She initiates the contact.
Her opening line is literally just, "Do you need a hand with that box? It looks pretty heavy."
It seems like the most mundane thing in the world to say.
It really does.
But functionally, it is an incredibly sophisticated psychological maneuver.
Okay, how so? Walk me through the mechanics of that opening.
Well, think about the cognitive load we just discussed. Tom is stressed, his adrenaline is likely up, he's navigating a new environment.
Right, he's probably exhausted too.
Exactly. If Sarah were to open with a direct, abstract question about his identity, like, who are you? Where are you moving from? It would demand processing power from his impaired prefrontal cortex.
It would feel like an interrogation.
It raises the stakes immediately. It demands that he quickly formulate a narrative about himself while he's just trying not to drop a box.
Oh, I see. But by saying, do you need a hand with that box, Sarah does something vital.
She anchors the interaction to an immediate, tangible object in their shared physical space, the box.
That's fascinating. She bypasses his identity entirely and points to a piece of cardboard.
It takes the pressure off the social dynamic and places it onto the physical environment.
So the conversation isn't about Tom, and it isn't about Sarah.
Right, it's temporarily just about the weight and gravity of a cardboard box. It requires very little cognitive effort for Tom to process this. He just has to assess the box.
And the phrase itself, need a hand, is doing a lot of heavy lifting here too, no pun intended.
Oh, for sure.
Because if you pause and think about it literally, asking a stranger if they need a disembodied human hand is absurd. It's bordering on terrifying.
That's hilarious, but it's true. The literal absurdity highlights exactly how idioms function in high-stress situations.
They operate as a sort of cognitive bypass, right?
They really do. We don't have to parse the literal meaning of the words. An idiom like need a hand is so deeply embedded in our cultural software.
It functions almost like a musical chord rather than a sentence.
That's a great way to put it. It conveys a feeling of cooperative intent without demanding analytical thought.
It establishes a dynamic of alliance. By offering physical assistance, she is immediately signaling to Tom's threat detection system. I am a cooperator, not a competitor.
Yes, it is the lowest possible friction entry point into human contact.
It's a great practical rule of thumb to extract from this source. When you're feeling that social anxiety spike, the instinct is often to retreat inward and try to craft the perfect, clever opening line.
Which almost never works.
Never. But the most effective strategy is actually to look outward. Find a physical anchor in the shared environment.
Right. If they're struggling with the office printer, offer a hand. If they drop something, offer a hand.
You're utilizing the physical environment as a bridge, rather than trying to build a bridge purely out of social charm.
Which is much harder to summon when you are nervous.
Okay, so the initial friction is bypassed, the ice is broken. Sarah has signaled that she's not a threat.
But anchoring the conversation to a cardboard box only buys you about, 5 seconds of interaction?
Exactly. You can't sustain a relationship talking about corrugated cardboard.
At some point, the transition has to happen. They have to actually establish who they are.
And this transition is where most casual interactions just die.
Completely die. You get past the opening observation, cold weather today, or heavy box, and then this terrifying silence looms.
And the conversation rapidly devolves into an awkward interview. You start trading demographic data. What do you do? Where are you from? It feels so rigid.
Let's examine how Tom navigates this transition, because the source material points out a very specific choice he makes in how he presents himself.
So Tom is carrying the last box, so he politely declines Sarah's offer. He says, no, I'm okay, thank you, this is the last one.
And then he takes the initiative to establish his identity. I'm Tom, by the way. I'm moving into 4B.
Sarah responds in kind, introducing herself, establishing that she's in 4A across the hall, and welcoming him. It's the standard exchange of coordinates.
But it's his follow-up that the commentators really zoom in on. After the welcome, Tom says, thanks, it's a bit messy right now, but I'm slowly getting settled in. Everything is brand new to me.
This is a pivotal moment in the architecture of their connection. I want to look at the concepts he's utilizing here. Messy, settling in, and brand new.
It's such a specific linguistic choice.
I actually want to pause and challenge the wisdom of this approach, though. We are constantly conditioned, both professionally and socially, to curate a polished image.
First impressions are everything.
Exactly. You want to project competence, stability, and control. Admitting to a stranger you just met 30 seconds ago that your immediate environment is a mess, and that you are disoriented because everything is brand new. It seems incredibly counterintuitive.
I get why you'd say that.
Why reveal that lack of control? Doesn't it make you look bad?
Well, it does seem to violate the standard rules of self-presentation. We generally operate with what sociologists might call a front stage persona.
The polished, put-together version of ourselves that we present to the public.
Right, and the messiness, the disorientation, that is backstage reality.
And Tom is instantly inviting Sarah to peek behind the curtain at his backstage reality.
He is. And while it feels risky to expose that lack of polish, the analysis suggests that this specific type of mild situational vulnerability is actually a powerful catalyst for connection.
But why? Doesn't it make him look slightly chaotic?
Because an aura of total perfection is essentially a social wall. It offers zero surface area for another person to attach to.
Oh, that makes sense.
If Tom had replied, "Yes, I am moving in, my apartment is already flawlessly organized, and I have total command of my life," where does Sarah go with that?
She can only say, wow, good for you. It completely halts the momentum.
Exactly. Perfection creates a hierarchy. It places the perfect person on a pedestal, which immediately distances them from the listener.
Right, it's intimidating.
But by volunteering that his life is currently a bit chaotic, that he is merely settling in and slightly overwhelmed by things being brand new, Tom intentionally lowers his own status in the dynamic.
He levels the playing field.
He signals that he's not trying to dominate the interaction. This lowering of armor does something remarkable to the other person.
It invites empathy rather than competition.
Exactly.
I see the logic, but there must be a line, right? There has to be a difference between situational vulnerability and, like, uncomfortable oversharing.
Oh, definitely.
Because if he had said, it's a bit messy right now because I'm going through a terrible divorce and I'm deeply depressed, that would trigger a completely different response.
That is a crucial distinction. The vulnerability he displays is highly calibrated. It is entirely related to the shared context of the building and the universal experience of moving.
It is safe vulnerability.
Yes, very safe. The commentators in our source highlight just how deeply relatable this specific state is.
One of the experts notes that they have lived in their house for 5 years and still feel like they haven't fully unpacked.
They are perpetually settling in.
That's so true. The feeling of being slightly behind on life, of not having everything perfectly ordered, is an almost universal human condition.
And by admitting to it, Tom transitions from being an anonymous entity, a blank slate, to a recognizable human being experiencing a struggle we all intimately understand.
He's offering a hook. He's putting an emotional reality on the table and waiting to see if she will pick it up.
Which creates a perfect runway for Sarah. He's handed her the opportunity to bridge the gap between them.
The ball is in her court. Will she ignore the vulnerability or will she validate it?
Let's look at her response, because she doesn't miss a beat. Tom says things are messy and brand new.
Sarah immediately fires back. I remember that feeling. I moved here 2 years ago. It's a great neighborhood.
Notice the precise mechanics of her empathy here. She doesn't just offer generic sympathy. She doesn't say, "Oh, that sounds stressful."
Right, which would keep her at a distance. It would sound almost clinical, like looking down on him.
Instead, she explicitly grounds her response in her own history. I remember that feeling.
It's like she is deploying a conversational time machine. She is instantly transporting herself back to the exact emotional state he is in right now.
That is a highly effective way to conceptualize it. True empathy often involves this kind of temporal displacement.
You're reaching into your own archive of experiences to prove to the other person that their current reality is not alien to you.
Yes. She is validating the disorientation. She's saying, the chaotic state you are in is not a sign of failure. It is simply a phase of the timeline.
I know, because I was at that exact point on the timeline 2 years ago.
And by establishing that shared timeline, she radically alters the psychological dynamic.
How so?
Well, in our brains, we are constantly sorting people into in-group and out-group categories. A new neighbor defaults to the out-group.
They're an outsider.
Right. But by claiming a shared emotional experience, the stress of being brand new to this specific building, she pulls him into the in-group.
They are now two people who have survived the initiation ritual of moving into this complex.
Exactly. And once she establishes that shared ground, she immediately pivots to reassurance. It's a great neighborhood.
Validation of the struggle, followed immediately by a promise of a positive future. It's a highly sophisticated, deeply comforting conversational rhythm.
It is entirely comforting.
And there's a real tactical lesson here, a practical tip for anyone listening to this deep dive. When someone offers you that mild vulnerability, when they say they're tired or confused by a new software at work or feeling a bit disorganized, do not gloss over it to maintain a cheerful facade.
The instinct is often to say, "Oh, you'll be fine."
Which is so dismissive.
Right. It invalidates their reality.
The strategy is to pause, acknowledge the emotion, and locate a point in your own timeline where you felt the same way.
I remember that feeling. When I first tried to use that software, I wanted to throw my computer out the window.
Yes. It instantly dissolves the hierarchy and places you on the same team.
So we have successfully navigated the initial threat response with a physical anchor. We have moved past the superficial identity exchange by utilizing mild vulnerability.
And we've established a baseline of trust through temporal empathy. They are allies now. The tension is gone.
But this brings us to a perilous moment in the interaction. The immediate problem, the heavy box, the introductions, has been resolved.
The natural energy of the initial encounter is dissipating.
This is the moment I dread in hallway interactions.
Oh, me too. You've established that you're both nice people. You've smiled. But you don't know each other well enough to launch into a deep discussion about, like, politics or philosophy.
And you can only talk about the fact that you both live in the building for so long. The silence threatens to rush back in.
This is the juncture where an interaction either gently fades away, leaving you as polite acquaintances who just awkwardly nod at each other forever.
Or it transitions into a sustained connection.
And this is where Tom deploys what the source material highlights as the central, most critical maneuver of the entire exchange.
The conversational pivot.
Yes, the pivot that changes the entire trajectory of their relationship. We're going to focus heavily on this because it's such a brilliant strategy.
It's the transition from acknowledging each other's presence to actively seeking the other person's input.
Tom looks at Sarah and asks, "Actually, do you have any recommendations for a good coffee shop nearby? I really need a caffeine fix."
And Sarah's reaction is immediate and enthusiastic. She recommends a place called the Green Bean.
This exchange right here is the absolute core of our analysis today, the concept of the recommendation.
The experts analyzing this interaction spend significant time isolating why this specific request is so powerful.
They state clearly that asking for a recommendation is one of the most effective ways to artificially sustain a conversation.
Because it taps into a fundamental human drive.
They note that people simply love giving their opinions.
Which sounds like a casual observation, but there is deep psychological scaffolding beneath that idea.
I want to really dig into this
Yeah?
because I am inherently skeptical of this advice.
Really? Why is that?
Well, my instinct when I am trying to build rapport with a stranger is to avoid areas of potential conflict. Asking for an opinion feels like stepping onto a landmine
How so?
because opinions are subjective. If I ask a new neighbor for a coffee shop recommendation and she enthusiastically sends me to a place that I think serves terrible burnt coffee, what happens next?
So you're worried about the follow-up.
Exactly. I've engineered a situation where I either have to lie to her the next time I see her and say I loved it, or I have to disagree with her taste, which immediately creates friction. Why introduce subjective taste into a fragile new relationship?
That is a very logical concern, but it fundamentally misunderstands what is actually happening in this exchange.
Okay, correct me.
You are focusing on the coffee. The actual coffee is completely irrelevant to the psychological transaction taking place.
Irrelevant. How
Yeah.
can the subject of the question be irrelevant?
Because Tom is not primarily asking for a beverage destination. He is utilizing the structure of a request to alter the power dynamic between them.
All right, I'm listening.
He is engaging in a subtle form of status elevation.
Break that down for me. Status elevation.
Think about the dynamic. Tom is the newcomer. He is in a state of deficit. He doesn't know the area. He doesn't know the people.
Right.
Sarah is the established resident. She holds the local knowledge. When Tom asks for a recommendation, he is explicitly acknowledging her superior status in this specific domain.
He is saying, I recognize that you possess expertise that I lack. I am submitting to your guidance.
Precisely. He is intentionally making himself the student and her the teacher.
Oh, wow.
And human beings are deeply biologically wired to respond positively to being recognized as an authority or a resource. It triggers a reward loop in the brain.
When you are asked for advice, you feel valued, respected, and competent. It is deeply flattering.
So you see, it's not about the coffee at all. It's about giving her the gift of feeling knowledgeable.
It's related to that well-documented psychological phenomenon, right? Often referred to as the Ben Franklin effect.
Yes. The idea is that if you want someone to like you, you shouldn't necessarily do a favor for them. You should ask them to do a small favor for you.
Because it forces their brain to rationalize the interaction. I am helping this person, therefore I must like this person.
Exactly. Giving advice is a low-cost, high-reward favor. It requires zero physical effort from Sarah, but it grants her a surge of social capital. She gets to play the benevolent local guide.
And the text explicitly notes her enthusiastic response. She doesn't just give him an address. She is energized by the opportunity.
Oh, definitely. There's a place called the Green Bean just around the corner. Their lattes are amazing.
She has taken ownership of helping him.
It completely reframes the interaction. They are no longer two strangers trapped in a hallway. They are collaborating on a project, solving Tom's need for coffee.
It's brilliant. And there is a linguistic flourish Tom adds to the request that I think is worth noting. He doesn't just mechanically ask for coffee.
Right, he says he needs a caffeine fix.
The source material unpacks this phrasing carefully. The use of the word fix.
It's slang. It implies a desperate, almost chemical need for a substance. You need a sugar fix, a caffeine fix.
Obviously, he isn't in literal medical distress.
Right, it's colloquial hyperbole. It is a slight exaggeration for dramatic conversational effect.
But why does he use it here? Why not just say, I would like to purchase a coffee?
Because formal language maintains distance. By using slang, by employing a bit of hyperbole about his desperate need for caffeine, he's signaling something important.
That he feels comfortable enough with her to drop the stiff, formal neighbor persona.
It's another subtle lowering of the armor. It assumes a level of casual intimacy that hasn't been strictly earned yet.
But by assuming it, he creates it.
Exactly. It adds color and personality. It shows he understands the cultural shorthand.
This recommendation pivot is a tool everyone should have in their back pocket. It is the ultimate practical tip, the perfect antidote to conversational stalling.
It really is.
When you feel the energy dipping, when the terrifying silence approaches, hand the microphone over to the other person. Ask them to perform their expertise.
It is incredibly versatile because everyone is an expert in something. You can ask for a recommendation on a local park, a decent mechanic, a new podcast, a streaming series.
Hey, I'm looking for a good Italian place around here. Any thoughts?
And the beauty of it is that it practically guarantees a follow-up interaction. This is the crucial part of the architecture.
Tom hasn't just solved the awkwardness of the current moment. He has built a bridge to the future.
The next time they cross paths in the hallway, the pressure is entirely off.
Right. Because he doesn't have to scramble for a topic. He has a built-in, pre-approved conversation starter. Hey, Sarah, I went to the Green Bean. You were totally right. The lattes are incredible.
Or if he didn't like it, going back to your earlier worry, he can gently pivot. I tried it. Great atmosphere, but I think I prefer a darker roast. Is there another spot you like?
Either way, the thread of connection has been successfully spun.
The transaction is complete. He asked for guidance, she provided it, he accepted it. The Green Bean. Got it. Thanks, Sarah. I'll check it out.
Which brings us to the final, and perhaps most deceptively difficult phase of the interaction.
Severing the connection.
The exit. Exits are agonizing. I would argue that figuring out how to gracefully end a conversation is even harder than starting one.
Oh, absolutely. Because you are fighting conflicting social drives.
You don't want to linger and become a nuisance, trapping the person when they clearly have somewhere to be.
But you also don't want to abruptly turn and walk away, which signals dismissal or rudeness. You have to find a way to smoothly de-escalate the social energy.
We have all been hostage to that terrible conversational purgatory where the topic is completely exhausted, both people clearly want to leave, but neither person knows the precise linguistic formula to initiate the exit.
So you just start nodding vigorously, slapping your knees, saying, right, well, over and over again.
Anyway, it's so painful. But the source material provides a highly effective model for avoiding that purgatory. Let's look at the exact phrasing Sarah uses to close the loop.
She says, no problem. See you around, Tom. And Tom simply replies, see ya.
The commentators zero in on the phrase, see you around. They highlight it as a structural ideal for this specific type of relationship.
It is the ultimate low-pressure exit.
Why does low pressure matter so much in this context?
Because they just met. The relationship is incredibly fragile.
Right. If she had said, let's get coffee together tomorrow at 8 a.m., that is a massive escalation of pressure.
It demands a commitment. It forces Tom to either accept a date he might not want or reject her immediately, which destroys the rapport they just built.
It overloads the circuit.
Exactly. See you around does the exact opposite. It acknowledges that they exist in the same physical orbit, they live in the same building, they will inevitably cross paths.
But it demands absolutely nothing from either party. It requires no scheduling, no commitment, no follow-up.
It permanently upgrades their status from strangers to friendly acquaintances while fiercely respecting their individual boundaries.
It leaves the door open without forcing anyone to walk through it.
It's clean. It's elegant.
And what I find really fascinating is what the experts in our source materials suggest after breaking down this dialogue. They don't just present the analysis and move on.
No, they actively instruct the listener, the learner, to practice the physical act of speaking these phrases.
They include a prompt to literally say a sentence out loud. Do you have a recommendation for a good book?
They explicitly state that practicing these full sentences helps the mouth get used to the physical sounds. I love that they acknowledge the biological reality of speech.
It brings us full circle to the very beginning of our analysis, back to the physiological panic of the amygdala hijack.
The idea that conversation isn't just a mental chess game, it is a complex motor function.
Exactly. When you are standing in that hallway and cortisol is flooding your system and your prefrontal cortex is shutting down, you cannot rely on declarative memory.
Declarative memory being your ability to consciously recall facts or formulate new ideas. That system is impaired under stress.
You can't think your way out of the panic.
No, you have to rely on procedural memory, muscle memory. Just as a pianist doesn't consciously think about where to place their fingers during a rapid arpeggio, their hands just know the shape of the chord.
Your mouth needs to know the shape of the conversation.
You need to have physically articulated the phrase, "Do you have a recommendation?" so many times in low-stress environments that the neurological pathway is deeply paved.
It needs to reside in the basal ganglia, the part of the brain that handles habit and automatic movement.
So when the adrenaline hits and your mind goes blank, you don't have to invent a strategy. The muscle memory takes over.
Your mouth simply deploys the phrase autonomously. That's incredible.
It is a profound insight into how we handle social friction. It's not enough to intellectually understand that asking for a recommendation is a good idea.
You have to physically train your body to execute the maneuver under pressure.
And we actually witness this concept of structural repetition playing out in real time at the very end of the source material.
Oh, yes. It is a wonderful piece of meta-commentary by the authors of the source.
The two commentators wrap up their formal breakdown of Sarah and Tom's interaction. And then, seamlessly, one speaker turns to the other and complains that they are starving.
They ask their co-host for a lunch recommendation.
And pay close attention to the vocabulary they employ in this unscripted moment.
They playfully recycle the exact linguistic architecture they just spent the whole text analyzing. The second speaker recommends a pizza place on the corner, making sure to note that it is brand new.
And the first speaker enthusiastically accepts the recommendation, declaring that pizza is exactly the fix they need.
It's a brilliant pedagogical wink to the audience. They are proving that this architecture isn't just a rigid script for new neighbors. It is a universal framework.
It is fractal. The same structural rules that govern a high-anxiety encounter between strangers in a hallway also govern a casual banter between colleagues or friends.
The variables change, the level of intimacy changes, but the core mechanics remain remarkably consistent.
Anchoring to the physical, offering mild vulnerability, elevating status through recommendations, and utilizing low-pressure exits.
It demonstrates how these structural pivots create a natural, engaging back and forth. It's not about memorizing lines. It's about understanding the rhythm of human exchange.
The speaker asks for a fix. The other offers a recommendation based on something brand new. It flows effortlessly.
And it culminates in a profound concluding thought from the source material. One of the commentators remarks that every conversation is a chance to learn.
That specific phrase really lodged in my brain. Every conversation is a chance to learn.
It seems so simple, almost like a cliche, but if you actually apply it to the framework we've just deconstructed, it radically reframes the entire concept of social interaction.
It shifts the paradigm from defense to exploration.
Exactly. We spend so much of our lives viewing strangers as obstacles. There are people in our way on the sidewalk, people taking up space on the bus, or, as we discussed at the beginning, potential sources of acute social anxiety.
We view them as threats to be managed or avoided.
We keep our heads down, we put our headphones on, we build a fortress of isolation to protect ourselves from the unpredictable variable of another human being.
But if we truly internalize the architecture of this interaction, if we realize that we possess the tools to safely navigate the initial friction,
To lower the armor, and to successfully pivot the dynamic into a space of shared expertise, it changes everything.
the source material leaves us with an implicit challenge. It asks you, the audience, to recall the last new person you met, a neighbor, a coworker, someone at a coffee shop.
Think about that person for a moment. Think about how that interaction unfolded. Did it stall out in the awkward purgatory of polite demographics?
Did you retreat into your phone?
And more importantly, Think about how you might utilize this specific structural framework the next time you find yourself standing in front of a completely blank slate, feeling that familiar spike of cortisol.
Because if every conversation is genuinely a chance to learn, it forces a fascinating proposition.
What happens if you actively choose to stop viewing the strangers around you as threats to your peace of mind?
What happens if you start viewing every single person you pass on the street, every person waiting in line with you, as a walking, breathing library of hidden recommendations just waiting to be accessed?
It transforms the landscape of your daily life. The person sitting next to you on the train isn't just an anonymous commuter, they are the keeper of the best novel you haven't read yet.
The barista isn't just a transactional mechanism for caffeine. They hold the secret to the best obscure hiking trail in the city.
The new neighbor isn't an intruder, they are a resource.
Suddenly, the world isn't a minefield of awkward, terrifying encounters. It becomes an incredibly dense network of potential discoveries.
The friction of meeting someone new isn't something to be feared. It is the necessary spark to unlock their specific expertise.
All it requires is understanding the mechanics of the approach.
You just have to train your muscle memory. You have to push past the sweaty palms, anchor the moment, show a little vulnerability, and ask for the fix.
Keep practicing the mechanics and stay endlessly curious about the people around you.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the hidden architecture of the everyday. The next time your heart starts racing in a quiet hallway, remember the structure. You possess the tools to turn a stranger into a resource. See you around.